Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to our very first edition of a new series called Heart Chronicles. I am Amber.
And I am Minister Tasha.
So, the purpose of Heart Chronicles is to kind of set or put together a platform where Minister Tasha and myself come together and we talk about matters of the heart. So, Tasha, you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. So, our first topic that we are going to talk about on Heart Chronicles is called defining boundaries. As many of you all know, boundaries is one of those things that most women struggle with, as we struggle
Yes.
with boundaries in our relationships, with friendships, on our job. So, we're just going to kind of dig in and dive in a little deeper on the topic and the subject matter, okay? So,
We're going to start off with what is a boundary? How would you define a boundary?
I would probably define a boundary as, I guess, more or less a defining line, where you draw the line at as who you are as an individual and who you are as a person, and what it is that you accept and what it is that you do not accept.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that?
Pretty much the same thing. I think it's limitations that you set for yourself as well as limitations that you set for other people. As far as interaction, how they treat you or how you treat them. And how you show love, how you show respect, and how you receive it as well. Because I think a lot of times we fail at setting boundaries because I think most people don't know exactly what they are until until the line is actually crossed.
Absolutely. I would definitely have to agree with that. I know one of the things that boundaries has taught me is that it teaches me how to have control, how to have self control over my space. And like many women, I've struggled with that in the past. I've struggled with defining boundaries because we don't want to hurt people's feelings. We don't want them to feel like we're standoffish
Right.
or snobbish.
Right.
So we kind of feel uncomfortable to define a boundary for other people, for our space.
Right. And I think that sometimes we feel like it's wrong because it could possibly be like how we were brought up, that we're being disrespectful to someone because at one point, depending on the relationship, when you were younger, you can't say this or you can't say that or you can't do that. Then once you get older, but just because you respond to it in a certain manner, it's taken as disrespect, and it's not disrespect. It's just now we can't interact from the same space. So it's kind of going back to the meaning. It's actually defining your space and what that looks like.
I would definitely agree. As we mentioned when we first came on, that defining boundaries is an area that you have to define a boundary with everything in your life. You
Right.
can't necessarily pick and choose.
Right.
You have to define a boundary with friends,
Right.
with your parents as an adult. I
Right.
have to define boundaries with my mother.
Right.
I have to define boundaries with my in-laws.
Right.
You even have to define boundaries with your exes. And I know that's
Right.
sounds strange or cliche to
Right.
say because people don't think about that.
Right.
But when you have ex-husbands or you have someone you may have been in a relationship with and you have children, there has to be boundaries established because your boundaries are a little more open in those areas
Right.
when
Right.
you're in relationship.
Right.
And then they change
Right.
as those relationships end.
But I think also before you can even establish a boundary with other people, they have to be set within yourself.
I agree.
You have to
agree.
know what your limitations are, how far you're willing to go. And then just because you'll go this far with this person, different circumstances require different things. So are you going to have the same boundary across the board? Or is it pliable?
So
The-
you kind of raise another question about setting boundaries across the board. Is there a boundary that is set for all, or do we put certain people in a position where they have a boundary that other people don't?
Good question. I would say that's something that we probably do unconsciously.
I think we do. I think we do. I mean, when you think about, for example, if you go to a family reunion,
Right.
and you're there with all of your friends and family, well,
Okay.
you may have a family member who has a drinking problem.
Right.
There are boundaries on how maybe if they can take your children somewhere. There are boundaries on whether or not they can be in your personal space because they act different when they're under the influence.
That's true.
So
That's true.
I do think that we unconsciously set boundaries. We may let some people get very close to us, and we may let some people, no, you can't get that close. Just so I do believe it's unconsciously that we do it, and I think it's okay.
I think so too, and I also think we do that because it all depends on how much we feel is at stake. So, like in the instance that you use your kids, as far as what you want your kids exposed to, so you're gonna, create that boundary. No, maybe don't go so far over there, if they're smoking or drinking, because don't want them tainted just yet.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
that's where that boundary comes in. And again, like you said, we do it unconsciously, because over here it may be okay, but then when the kids aren't around, then we're like, oh, okay, y'all do what y'all do, depending on the atmosphere and the circumstances and the situations. I think we have been prone to adjust according to the atmosphere as opposed to I do know some people that it is the same across the board. When people start drinking and smoking or whatever it is they do, they're like, I'm gone. I don't do that, so I'm out.
I agree.
I think it's just person by person.
I agree. So I know it's very easy for us to kind of get in a position where we can talk about all the different boundaries that we set for other people as far as what the expectation is for how they come into our space. But how do we set expectations for ourselves as it relates to boundaries? I think one of the areas that I have to set an expectation for myself is I have to set an expectation of what is acceptable for me as it relates to my appearance.
That's good. That's a good one. That's a good one.
So,
Because I think we struggle with that as women, so that's good.
we do, and I set boundaries on how I dress. There are some things that are just crossing the line for me. But at the same token, people think that because I'm saved, I still can't be fashionable. And maybe I should say, I think that's probably the viewpoint of those that are not saved because they don't understand. They've got this thought process that if you've become saved that you have to wear skirts down to your ankle and you can't let any shoulders out, as you see we've done today. But I think that we have to be very careful with ensuring that setting boundaries does not box you in.
Because sometimes it can.
It can, but it helps you define your individuality.
I think with that, the boundary with that would be making sure that you remain who you are, and not. There are some things that we should conform to because it's right to do, but there are other things that we don't have to totally conform to because, just like you said, just because I'm a Christian woman now and I'm saved, I can still love the Lord and be fashionable because it's all about Him anyway. Because what most don't realize, and even some people in the church that have been in the church for a long time, by reason of tradition, feel like, you have to do this, and this, not understanding that it's all for God's glory. And so the boundary for me, I will say, even coming forward, being a minister, I struggle with that accepting my calling because, I have blonde hair, there are some things that I kind of push the bar on. And it's not anything that I'm trying to push the bar on, but it's how God made me.
Absolutely.
And it's for His glory because those are the things that draw people that look like me.
Absolutely.
So that's a boundary that I set within myself to not get offended or change who I am based upon other people's opinions because of what they expect. Because that's where boundaries come from, people's expectations or lack thereof.
I would totally agree with that. And I think sometimes if we're not careful, we will take on the boundaries that other people place on us.
Absolutely, we do.
And their expectations as to how we should look and how we should talk and how we should walk, how we should praise if we're doing too much. And I think sometimes, anytime you step outside of the comfort zone of someone else's expectation for you,
right, that's crossing their boundary. That's crossing their boundary.
But it's not crossing your boundary.
That's right.
So I want everyone to always understand that defining your boundaries is just defining who God has created you to be.
And that it's a must. It is, and it's a must to define that, though. Yes, because if we were all cookie cutter, then we all look the same, we walk the same. So because He made us all members in one body, we all fit together. So my part may not be your part. We may function kind of the same, but it's still going to look kind of different. You know,
Absolutely.
so it's about, again, setting the boundary within yourself that this is it. This is what God is saying to me in this season and at this time, until He says, okay, it's time to release that or move past this to something else. But it's knowing exactly where you are and the space that you're in.
I would agree. I would agree. I think it's in the book of Ephesians 4:15. It says, "But speaking the truth in love may grow up into Him all things, which is the head, even Christ." And I think what that scripture is telling us, that we can be honest in ourselves of who we are.
Right.
It's okay to set those boundaries and let those boundaries align with the will of God.
Right. I think what happens though is not the boundary setting that I think is the issue. I think it's how it's conveyed. You know, if you, as the scripture said, if you don't speak it in love, then it's going to come across offensive, even though, you know the space you're coming from. But if you don't have compassion behind that, you don't have gentleness behind that, then the message is the boundary is going to be missed completely until the person goes and thinks about it, maybe even days later, and then God reveals to them, because, the Holy Spirit is He's our helper. And so He helps us to understand all things. And that's when you can look back and reflect on whatever when the boundary was said that you probably didn't know was a boundary, or if you did, each situation is different. That's how you can move past the offense of someone setting their boundary or lack thereof, if that makes sense.
Yes, I get what you're saying. I guess it kind of leads me to the question. So, when you've set a boundary and someone crosses it, do you think that God is upset with us when we, I guess, separate ourselves and draw the line in the sand? Because on one token, of course, God wants us to love all people, love those that don't look like us, love those that don't necessarily treat us right. We're still to show love. But when you've defined your personal boundaries and someone crosses them, and you draw the line in the sand and you separate yourself, do you think that God is still pleased with us in those choices?
That's a very good question, because I think that line in the sand, that's where it becomes about us. It's a very fine line, because sometimes when boundaries are set, and I think I've seen this a lot in ministry, in business, in regular relationships, people miss the whole point of the boundary, because just because I said this is my line, that doesn't mean that I don't want to deal with you or not. It's just saying that this is it. If we were already in relationship and we're already coming together, you have to remember the main goal and the main focus. So in situations such as that, you have to keep the greater cause in the forefront, because especially if it's in ministry, let's just use that as an example. It's not about me. It's not about them. It's about God.
Right.
And so with that, you can't cut this person off, because, again, we're many members, one body. So if you cut off the finger because the finger is restricted, how's it going to function?
I get what you're saying, Minister Tasha.
I know. And I'm not by it. No means am I saying that it's an easy thing.
It is not an easy thing, because there's a quote that I found when I was kind of just doing some additional research as it relates to the topic that we're talking about. And it said, "A lack of boundaries invites a lack of respect." So in my mind, if I allow someone to still stay in my space when they don't respect my boundaries, I'm inviting respect. But in the same token, if God is telling me I can't necessarily cut them off, because then I'm separating and making it about me, I'm a little torn.
But I think because the connecting piece is the part that we're not saying. Communication. The boundary is set. This made me feel some type of way. It's natural for us to tuck our tails and run.
Right.
You have to have the conversation, because that's just like discarding somebody because something didn't quite go my way. And just because it didn't come across how I thought, so that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to stay in this feeling of disrespect, because you choose to stay there. Have the conversation and then move forward accordingly after the conversation is had. And it may take more than one conversation depending on the person and the situation. And again, I'm not saying that this is an easy thing. I'm not sitting here great to tell you like
an easy thing.
I have it all together, because again, it's situation by situation. There have been some times, And I'm a calm person by nature that I've had to internally be like, hold up. You know,
Did that just happen? Yes.
don't let this, hold on. Hold on. Just
Yes.
give me a second to get it together. Okay. So here we go. But, and there have been times when I have been offended. But then I have to ask myself, why was I offended by their boundary? I'm an internal work person, so I always go inward first before I go outward. And I'm going to ask myself, well, why was I offended? What about that offended me? Why was their boundary offensive to me? Was it how they said it? Was it the fact that, okay, my ego is bruised because I thought that we had this relationship, but now I realize that we have a relationship, but it wasn't quite to the degree or the extent that I thought. So is that because it's the rude awakening that it ain't quite like I thought?
Yeah.
You know, so it's
So
just,
why do you think, and I'll try to elaborate on this, but just to kind of put the question out there, what do you think is the biggest struggle that people have with accepting others' boundaries? I think it is, like as you just mentioned, I think it is an ego
it
thing.
is. It's definitely pride and ego.
Because you feel shut down.
Yes, you do.
And we don't like, as individuals and human beings, to be shut down.
And it feels like rejection.
It feels like rejection. And rejection is hard for anybody.
Yes, it is.
I don't care what the situation is. If it's rejection from a job, rejection from a relationship, passing a test, it doesn't feel good. And when someone sets boundaries, it rejects our intentions. And I think that's what hurts.
I think it's that, but I also think the main thing why our ego is bruised, if you will, or our pride is kind of bruised, if you will, is because it's not what they said, it's how they said it when they set their boundary. You know, if it comes across stank, naturally you're not going to hear nothing that they said. All you're going to hear is that tone. And when you hear that tone come up out that mouth, and you like,
Tone is everything.
oh, and so you're stuck on the tone
Right.
and not the content of what they're saying. And so you miss the whole boundary, which is, again, why you basically retract and want to drop this line like, okay, I'm done with that. But it's about being mature, being able to look beyond that tone. And it takes self-discipline. It takes self-control. And it really takes you allowing God to really mold your heart and really, you know, work on that thing. Because, again, it's not easy. We hear things based upon what we've been through. We receive things based upon what we've been through. We think about things based upon what we've been through. So just because they set a boundary, we don't even receive it how they said it or what they were saying. We receive it on what we've been through.
Right.
It looks like, feels like, ooh, there's that thing again. There you go.
That's boundaries is just one of those topics sometimes you don't even want to talk about.
Right, because it's touchy.
It's a very touchy
It's touchy.
It's easy when you get with your girlfriends to kind of complain and say, I'm not dealing with that. I'll take A, B, C, and D. But when it is time to go ahead and speak those things that you just sat over at your girlfriend's house and complained about, it tugs on your spirit.
It does.
Because you don't want people to see you in this light of arrogance. Because I think boundaries and defining boundaries comes off as arrogant. It comes off as, oh, you think you better. No, it's not that I think I'm better. It's just I have made a decision to let you know, just as I have confirmed in my own spirit, what's okay for me and what's not. Because I think as children, we allow a lot of things to happen, even as teenagers. It's almost a peer pressure thing. That's not really your choice of maybe activity or a group of people to hang around with or topic to gossip about. But because you're in the midst, you kind of roll with the flow. I think as you get older, you start defining those boundaries. And hey, if that's what you choose to do, that's fine. But over here in this circle, that's not the space that I like to dwell in.
And you just said that sometimes it can come off as arrogant. I think a lot of my experience has been, you know, when a boundary is set, people think that you don't care. So where you may have once been so involved in their decision making and being their counselor and their shoulder to lean on, and then when you're like, you know what,
I gotta cut the ties here.
I'm not even
It's
cutting
weighing
them.
on me.
It's weighing on me,
Yes.
so I'm not cutting it, but I'm not gonna pour as much as I used to pour because it may be enabling you to use your brain, or to use your problem solving skills. I'm not gonna say use your brain because that sounds crazy, but to use your problem solving skills. I think we enable people a lot when we don't set boundaries in certain situations. So for some things, it's like I said, oh, now you don't care. And it's not that I don't care. It's just that I have to take a half a step back to give you some room to figure it out, because what I've learned with setting that boundary within itself, keep my mouth closed, guess what? They figure it out. And
Yes.
I sleep good at night when they do.
Absolutely. So, of course, when we define the boundaries, of course, we take those defining lines and we take them with us in the different spaces that
Yes,
we
we
go.
do.
What are some of the things or some of the ways in which you have to define your boundaries in the house of faith? I think coming in as a newcomer, people don't think about that.
Right.
Because we kind of have this mindset of coming into the house of faith, coming into church is a place where you can just lay out everything.
Mm-hmm.
And you can to God.
Mm-hmm.
But you should not lay out everything to everybody.
That's
because
true.
you open up the space for your boundaries to begin getting crossed. Sometimes in our vulnerable moments, we will open up too much information and we will allow people into spaces that to some degree will feel like it crossed the boundary. Kind of when they start having conversations, you're like, oh, that's a little personal. Well, you have to be careful about that. And not just in the house of faith, but even on the job with coworkers. We are all brothers and sisters in Christ when we come into the church. But I think that God still expects for us to set some type of boundary as it relates to what we share until we are in a place where we have been transformed and we can use it
More
as
mature.
a more
Absolutely.
mature conversation.
Absolutely.
I think that you have to be careful about setting boundaries until you have been transformed.
But I think what happens, though, like you said, when you're stepping into the house of faith, people don't understand the boundary because their boundary may have been for their entire life to not tell anyone anything.
Yeah.
So then when they get in this atmosphere, it's like vomit. Everything just comes out right now.
That is true.
It's like a hurricane that just erupts. So I don't think that every situation is intentional.
That's true.
When that happens,
That is true.
I just think it's been held in for so long, and it's like popping a balloon. Once you pop it,
All the air is gone.
all the air is gone.
And it is a release sometimes.
And it is. But I think it also for the people that are on the receiving end of it, they have to be mature enough to know what to do with that, how to encourage the person in whatever it was that they just revealed, and there's still a boundary.
Yes.
Am I going? Because we know that a lot of times people latch on to you
Yes,
if you
they
start
do.
pouring into them and talking to them. Then
Yes.
every time you see them, they want you. You got a word, So you have to use. There goes again that boundary on how far, how involved you'll be in their transformation from becoming a babe to more mature in their walk.
I would agree with that. I was reading an article, and I'm going to kind of give you 3 bullet points. And it
Okay.
talked about everyone being made up of 3 different parts that make up who we are. It says there's the sanctimonious you, there's the straying you, and the suffering you. And I think all 3 of those particular topics dwell within every single
absolutely.
person. So when I read that, I'm like, wow, I started thinking, so what parts of me are sanctimonious? They're calm. I feel like I have control
Absolutely.
over them.
Those
And then
are-
I've
those
got
are the easy things.
Those are the easy things. And then we've got those strain pieces that we don't really want to even touch. We almost try to act as if they do not
don't
even
exist.
exist. And then, of course, we have the suffering. We have those things that have affected us and hurt us in some way, be it childhood, be it relationships, friendships, parenting, the home we grew up in. And each of those areas are what allow us to define the boundaries we have for our lives.
Right, and then the thing with that is, as you discussed, because of your upbringing, your parenting, your friends, your family, not all of those boundaries are healthy.
They are not. I would agree.
And so when
I would
you,
agree.
I think it's shocking when you do learn that that one isn't a healthy one, because that wall says nobody in, nobody out. So how is anybody going to get to me if there's no access?
Mm-hmm.
You know, or I grew up in a home where, you know, I'm sure we all did. You don't tell our family business.
Absolutely. Yes.
That's our family business.
quiet.
Be quiet.
What
And
happens in this house stays
it
in
stays
this
in this house. And so what we don't realize with that boundary is they were actually teaching us to withhold stuff even from them.
Very true.
You
Very
know,
true.
you're teaching us that art because of this boundary that you said that was supposed to be only for over here, but it actually affected over here too.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of them unhealthy boundaries, you know, because you learn to be sneaky. I'll speak for
Yes.
myself.
And I'll second that.
You know, hey, I wasn't always what you see.
Yes.
You know, but it is what it is. But we do form a lot of unhealthy boundaries. I think when we form healthy ones, it's, like you said, as far as maintaining, if someone is just outright abusing you or being completely disrespectful, of course God doesn't want us to be trampled upon. That's not his will for us. So in those cases, yes, by all means, set a boundary. You're supposed to, because we're not supposed to be abused.
Absolutely.
He didn't put us here for that.
Absolutely.
The unhealthy ones, I think those are harder to address because sometimes it breaks the norm of your family. You know, what we've always done this. So when you're the one to step out and do something different from everyone else, it goes back to what you were saying earlier. Oh, she thinks she's.
Yes.
Because you chose a different way, because you realized that boundary that was passed down may not have been so right. You know, so it looks foreign until other people start seeing you do it. Then other people try to, I ain't gonna say they try to, but they start mimicking what they see. They're like, oh, okay, that worked for her. I bet want to do that, so let me try it. Be it in your family, or it may be friends. It could be, you never know who's paying attention that's been around to watch you make the transition from this set of boundaries to now you have these over here.
I would agree. So, just so that our audience kind of has something to kind of take away with them, what advice would you give to them as it relates to taking the first step in setting boundaries and defining boundaries for yourself and for others?
I think the first step would be accepting that it's okay. It's okay to set a boundary. It doesn't make you mean or soft or whatever other label you want to tag on it.
Right.
It's okay to set a boundary. It's okay to speak that boundary. It's
Being
all
very direct about how you feel.
But
Yes.
be direct, but it's all in how you communicate that. Don't communicate it in a stank manner. If someone did cross your boundary, it's okay to say, you know, hey, this is how that felt. This is what it was, you know,
Yeah.
or whatever.
And I think that when you're defining your own personal boundaries, you have to have a conversation with yourself
First, and that's the hard part.
You cannot take your thought
That's it.
process out and to others and expect for them to comply, and you have not confirmed it within your own self.
Or you're
if
not even
it's
doing, or
okay.
you're not even doing it yourself. How can
Absolutely.
you ask me to do something that you're not even
You're not
doing
doing
yourself? So, like
yourself.
you said, it's going to take one of those real long, hard looks in the mirror. And sometimes we as women, which is pretty as our makeup is and our hair and our jewelry, that is one of the hardest things for us
It
to do
is.
is look in that mirror
Look in that mirror.
and accept what you see.
Yeah, because accepting what you see helps you to realize what you've allowed.
What you've allowed, and that is time to make a change.
It's time to make a change.
Be that good. Well, it's only good. It has to be good.
Yeah.
The boundary has to be
Absolutely.
good. But you have to know that you're worthy of setting a boundary.
Absolutely, I agree.
And I think we should stop there, because that worthy of setting a boundary is gonna open up a
Yes.
whole different can of worms. And so we don't want to get into that, but we will get into it next week.
on our next episode of Chronicles. We're going to have a continuation of this particular topic just because boundaries is such a very, it's a very deep topic and
Yes.
it's a personal topic.
Yes, it is.
So catch us next week. We'll be coming back and continuing our conversation as it relates to defining boundaries and what they are and how to do that.
Yes.
So thank you so much for joining myself
Minister Tasha.
and we will see you on the next episode
Yes.
of
Heart Chronicles.